Hey guys, welcome to Coffee Economics. My name is Abe. Today is going to be a special one. We're going to be reviewing two speeches from the Summit for a Global Financial Pact that was held in France. We're going to be reviewing the speech by President William Ruto and the speech by South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa. As well, these videos will just be the snippets. I'm not going to do the full-length video. If you want to watch them, I'm going to put links down below in the description box as well for you guys to check out the full video. Now, let's get into it.
Thank you very much, and let me appreciate my brother Macron for putting this. How dare you? From where I sit, we need out of this summit, we need two outcomes. Number one, we need to agree on how do we get emergency liquidity. Number one, how do we deal with debt that is saddling many developing countries, and how do we get additional money in the context of what Motley said in the morning: urgency and skill.
So guys, the issue around debt is quite a serious issue plaguing Africa. So particularly the thing that Ruto is going to talk about here is not just there being too much debt, but the fact that the debt repayments are too high, and he's going to touch on that. And I'm going to put a link below giving you guys an article which kind of gives you a starting point to look into this issue if you're interested. But yeah, he's already on point with this.
Those two things we need just to answer. In my very respectful submission, I believe we should not leave this conference until we agree on what we are going to do to get many countries in the global south to at least be in a position to have a conversation by sorting out their immediate issues. Getting into the war in Europe and getting into the climate change situation, the many crises we have to sort out, what we need to do urgently. The proposal I make is we need to reform the multilateral development financing institutions.
So when Ruto is talking about the multilateral financing development institutions, I believe he's mostly talking about the IMF and World Bank here. So to give you an insight of what he means by that.
International financial architecture is not sitting pretty. UN Secretary General said on this podium this morning that there are countries that are paying 8 times in interest what the rest are paying.
This is a fact by Ruto. This is kind of well documented actually. So in that link that I was going to put on, which I'm going to put in the description, it gives you an article which talks about how African countries pay much more in interest repayments compared to other Western countries. Like the interest rate is massive. Like for some European countries, they're paying an interest rate that's negative, so they're actually giving the money away for borrowing, or even very low, around 1%, whereas African countries can be having an interest rate about 8, 10, 15, 16%, depending on that situation. So it's crazy how much the interest rate that they're paying. And to add to that, one of the reasons why Africa has got such high interest rates is because of the way the financial structure is around how people rate your credit risk. I'm going to probably do a separate video looking at how Ghana got into its issues, or just in general, I'm going to do a video around how African countries have a credit risk rating. And it's an interesting situation that the credit rating agencies are in, and how they rate countries, which is a really interesting conversation to have as Africans about that. But I'll let Ruto keep talking.
He was actually referring to those of us in Africa and largely in the global south. We're paying 8 times. The multilateral development banks have shareholders. Those shareholders cannot allow them to make certain decisions.
So when he's talking about shareholders here, he's talking about those banks like the IMF, World Bank, and that sort of types of banks. They probably have shareholders, even though those institutions are supposed to be doing the best interests of the world. They probably have just some core shareholders, which are most likely from Western countries. So those shareholders who want things in a certain way to make sure that they earn enough return for the risk that they perceive that they're going to get by lending to particular countries. So
it's okay. So how do we keep the shareholders happy? Let us tell them we will pay our debts. Give us 10 years or 15 years grace period and make the debt a 50-year loan. And we stop paying, we start with not paying the money we are supposed to pay next year, and they give us 10 years.
So this is a very interesting proposal by Ruto. So pretty much it's saying that Africa should be allowed to defer its payments. So instead of paying now, pay later. But there's a risk with that because it depends on how they make this deal with the lenders that they've got the money from. If they say you pay later, you probably are just making your interest repayments in the future even higher. So, because that's how mostly deferred payments sort of work in general for consumer finance. If you decide, like if you have a buy now, pay interest later, they keep counting that interest to your loan until you start having to repay those repayments. So if you can make all your repayments before that interest-free period is finished, great. But if you don't, it's really painful. So even though it sounds like a great idea, it's very risky because it means that you really need to have a strong plan of how you'll be able to repay your debt. Maybe Ruto is a great plan. We'll see.
What will happen is immediately the resources that we were supposed to pay for debt servicing become available to us to sort out the immediate issues. If we got an opportunity not to pay the $5 billion, and it is made available to us to provide water, to provide electricity, to do development, we would have money at scale. And if it was done for 10 years, and we are given 20 years grace period, we will be sorted. And everybody will be happy.
Well, that's true in theory, but still it's about how practically they can make that happen. Because one of the issues that we face in African countries is around how people, how we roll out these programs in terms of water, electricity, education, all these sort of things really need a really good public sector. And this is one of the things that African countries struggle with a weak public sector where I'm not talking about civil servants and teachers. I'm talking about people who can strategically advise government about what steps to take, what will provide the most benefit for each dollar that they spend, that sort of stuff. And I feel like that's one of the weaknesses that keeps Africa sort of settled in this poverty cycle. It's not because we don't have brave leaders like Ruto and the like. It's just that our public sector needs to be empowered by these brave leaders who say, hey, look, I trust in you guys to have really great ideas to really prop up the economy. Let's take your ideas, let's work together and make sure that we implement these ideas, and also building a culture within the public service that does not allow corruption or mismanagement to happen or that sort of like. So yeah, those are my 2 cents about that.
We will still pay our debt. It has just been postponed. So the shareholders have no problem. And we have immediate money to deal with our situation, so we are also not doing badly. So we can have a win-win. IEA, which Kenya just became a member, tells us that we need $9.2 trillion every year for us to get to net zero by 2050. We have a gap of $3.5 trillion. How do we raise $3.5 trillion to be able to close that gap? And I'm very sympathetic to what you said. Let us have a global financing mechanism. Loss and damage will not do it. I'm sorry. It will not do it because loss and damage is hostage to national interest.
That's true. Yeah.
No nation is going to give money from its people to sort out a global problem.
What Rito is describing is what in economics we call externalities, and yeah, he's so right that if nations have got their own self-interest, why would someone give money to another country when they've got their own problems to fix, and everyone is saying that their budgets are stretched? So he's right.
Let us agree to pay the aviation tax. We have no problem. Let us agree on the shipping tax, and we want to pay. We don't want anybody to pay for us. We want to pay our percentage. It is only when we...
I think Ruto just made policy just then. He's just agreed to paying aviation tax and shipping tax. I don't know if he consulted with the people in his department, his treasury, his financing, or any of those people. But it seems like he's already made that decision that, hey, we're going to do this. So good luck to all the public servants who will be helping him do that and calculating what that means for their public purse. Yeah, let's see how that goes.
raise global finances that have no national interest for any particular country or shareholder interest of any person, which is called Bretton Woods. The World Bank and IMF did not exist. They created it in 3 weeks. The agreement was done in 3 weeks. Why is it difficult for us? Because there was, the whole of Europe had been destroyed.
And I think that's a big part with climate change. Like, if you don't really see it, why worry about it? People just kick it down the road. Whereas war is very visible, the damages, the impact. So yeah, Ruto is right about that.
And so it was urgent and it was important for a decision to be made. On this subject of climate change, there is no developed, there is no developing.
Actually, I sit on a bit of a different slant on this one, where there's around climate change, where there is a difference between developed and developing. I think the developed nations would generally do better than the developed nations will do better than the developing nations because they're already working on mitigation, adaptation, all those things. They already have plans. They're already mapping this out. Like, everyone will feel it, but they're going to be in a better place than where Africa is sitting. So I think there's going to still be a difference.
We are all in trouble.
All right, that's it, guys, from William's Ruto speech. That was really good. Very interesting that his thoughts that he put out there around how there is a need for a new way of financing the climate change struggle or fixing climate change, and his other thoughts as well around Africa's debt and how probably there should be some sort of deferring of that debt. And I've given you my thoughts about that there still needs to be a little bit more thinking done, but it's good to have this conversation. So well done to President Ruto. So next we're going to watch President Ramaphosa's speech or closing remarks at the Global Financial Pact Summit in France. So here it is. Let's watch and hear.
Let me start off by saying, President Lula, don't worry. When we have the BRICS meeting, the issue of currency is top on the agenda.
Oh, very interesting. We're already talking about currency. Yeah, I've done a video about de-dollarization if you guys want to watch it, and it's also in the description below if you want to check it out. Yeah, it's a very interesting one, that one, but he's not going to be really talking about currency in his closing remarks, but yeah.
So we are going to discuss it. That the boards of directors of your multilateral institutions are not made up of independent directors. They're largely internal people or shareholders. So that in itself, for us, it's an important reform. We also need to look at the distribution.
Yeah, that's a big issue if those directors are not independent and they are just shareholders and already internal people, because yeah, they're making decisions for countries and the globe, those are very serious decisions. So it's really important that those directors actually reflect what is needed to achieve the public good for the countries and globally as well. So I agree with Ramaphosa on that.
You will have heard President Sisi talking about the 100 billion that was promised in Paris. President Sassou Nguesso yesterday as well also spoke about it at the dinner. Now there is that issue.
So when he's talking about the $100 billion here, he's talking in general about the $100 billion in regarding to, I believe, fixing climate change. So this is one of the issues that has been promised that, if African countries decide not to exploit some of their resources, we're happy to compensate them so that they can still get development, but not do it at the cost of, mining and all that sort of stuff that destroys the environment and causes more emissions to happen. So the West is saying, we'll compensate you $100 billion per year to help you develop, but in exchange that you do not do some activities that will cause global emissions to rise. So Ramaphosa is saying here is that promise hasn't been fulfilled, which is interesting. So
flowing from this summit, we do something very practical on the infrastructure side. Having said that 600 million people in Africa do not have electricity, and yet we've got all the resources to generate electricity, particularly the mighty Congo River, and that there have been plans to build a number of power stations that will generate, in my calculation, up to 70,000 megawatts. And he said, and I want to speak in support of this proposal, that to prove that these summits are not summits where we just talk, flowing from the Paris COP as well as others, let us now put money on the table.
Oh, that's a very bold ask to have. And I don't think Africa should be asking for this from the Europeans and the West. What I think is that the idea of having mega infrastructure in Africa has been an idea that's been talked about a long time, about having huge infrastructure projects. But history tells us that when there's these projects, sometimes it's not just about the implementation, where there's issues around who gets the contracts. If it's going to be the Europeans who get the contract, will they bring their own labor? Will the Chinese do the contracts and all that sort of thing? And who actually gets the benefits? And even after I've built this hydroelectric dam or power stations, it's about maintaining it. Who has the responsibility of maintaining it? Do we as Africans have the capacity to build the power lines, maintain them, run the infrastructure? And the next thing is how we will distribute and even sell the electricity. How do we make sure that is done by Africans rather than being taken up by people from the West who just take up that project and make huge amounts of money from that project? So even though it sounds like a great idea, I think as Africans we need to sort of think more internally rather than going to the West to say, can you put money down on this so that you can ensure that we're on the same path in terms of climate change and cooperating, working together. Rather, this can be an issue that can be solved within Africa, really. So pretty much there's lots of technology out there in terms of doing micro generation of electricity. So it can be done that it can be more localized. It doesn't have to be a mega project that feeds a lot of countries. And also environmentally, having a massive dam around the Congo River, that's going to have massive impacts, displacement of people, all that sort of stuff. There's lots of implications from this just one policy if it was to get legs. And I hope it doesn't, because there's so many other solutions to solve this. You don't need to have mega projects. Mega projects are not really needed in Africa, really. It's more just about having solutions that can be done at a local level that are smart.
Multilateral development banks here working together. The call that you've made, President Macron, can actually fund, and where, as we rise from this.
I also have to add, if the multilateral banks invest in this type of project, they'll expect huge returns, and that'll mean more money out of Africa instead of into Africa. So I'm not really for this project, but I do understand what Ramaphosa is trying to call for, a sort of a sense of, united project that we work on. But I think this can be done nationally by their own countries themselves. They can do this. We can do this.
President Sisi and I have been talking about a railway from Cape Town to Cairo for years. We will leave that for the next summit.
I don't know why we're bringing up a railway as another project to talk to Europeans about. Again, I think this is something that Africans can do themselves. I think, look, I'm not an engineer, but practically one way is that we need to standardize the railway gauges in all the countries and decide what route we're going to build on, mark that land, designate that land, and if there's going to be any a land value uplift. So because sometimes when things are built next to rail, the value of that land goes up in price. So who will get that prime land that will be next to the rail? How will that rail line be done? Who will be paying for the different stages of the rail? How will we fund that? It doesn't have to come from Europe. It can come from each individual country contributing to that, or even not just individual countries. It could be the blocks like the SADC and the ECOWAS working to say, look, let's build a line, this portion of line as one unit, and African Union being the coordinating body. It doesn't really need money from the West. They can probably give like a small part or be a small loan part of it, but really Africans can be saving money, putting it aside as part of that sovereign wealth fund and as an African wealth fund that will tackle this particular project around building rail. And if they do that, yeah, the Europeans can be part of it, but I think they should even just be, if they're even involved, they should just be a 1% share of it, really. But Africans should lead this project. It doesn't have to be something that is brought up to the Europeans. If it's got value, let them be knocking at the door of Africans rather than us Africans promoting this project to them. That's my thoughts. That's it, guys. I hope you enjoyed this video. And if you did, please put your comments below regarding my comments around what those said in those speeches. And also, I'd like to hear your thoughts about what you think those speeches meant to you and whether the ideas that were brought about were actually practical and something that can be actually done, and whether you've got different thoughts, like maybe you might agree or disagree. I'd love to hear that down in the comments. So thanks guys for watching. I'll see you guys in my next video. Check you guys later. Bye.